Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the mighty Jingles, where today, Sky Guy 126 has managed to find us a World of Tanks battle that isn't over in 6 minutes. What makes this even more remarkable is that it's a World of Tanks battle that isn't over in 6 minutes, and there are not one, but count them, two KV-2s in play. What dark sorcery is this? How can this be possible? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, and since this battle is going to get off to a relatively slow start, we've got plenty of time to talk about it. I mean, I don't really need to tell you about the KV-2, do I? I mean, how many people here are new and have never seen a World of Tanks video before? Yeah, there's not that many of you, are there? It's the KV-2. Big gun go derp, enemy tank go boom. Historically, because this tank really did exist, although it was an artillery tank. I mean, it wasn't for fighting other tanks, it was for shelling fortifications. And the recoil from that 152mm howitzer was so powerful that if you turned the turret to the side and fired the gun, the tank would flip over. But historically, this tank is probably most famous for an event that occurred during the opening stages of Operation Barbarossa in 1941 in World War II, where a single KV-2 held a bridge and delayed the advance of an entire German armoured division for a day. But this really happened. Now, I'm sure Soviet propaganda would have everybody believe that the courageous tankers simply sat inside their tank, valiantly fighting off the German hordes, refusing to give an inch, not one step back and all that. I think what was probably actually the case was that they couldn't, because under the barrage of anti-tank fire that they sustained, every single piece of track and running gear had been blown off. Well, I thought that was a Tiger for a moment. Very similar turret front, it's the BK-3001P. The tank was incapable of actually moving at all, and the crew was simply huddled inside the hull, screaming in terror, and because I know I would have been, and just praying for it all to be over. But whatever the actual truth of the matter, that KV-2 did stall the advance of an entire German armoured division for an entire day. Mostly because at the time, 1941, don't forget, most German tanks were armed with either machine guns or 20mm autocannon. There were some Panzer IVs with 75mm guns, but we're not talking about the long-barreled 75mm guns that Panzer IVs had in mid to late war. We're talking about very stubby, basically 75mm howitzers that mostly just fired high explosives. The Panzer... wow. Yeah, I know the Churchill's got strong armor, but it's not that strong armor. You know, that's a T-29 over... okay, well, never mind. Anyway. So, yeah, the Panzer IV did have a 75mm gun, but it wasn't an anti-tank gun. The Panzer IV was an infantry support tank, originally. The Panzer III had an anti-tank gun, but it was only a 50mm gun. So they just didn't have anything that could get through the armour of the KV-2, or the KV-1 for that matter. They had to resort to bringing up towed 88mm anti-aircraft guns and pummeling this thing into submission at point-blank range. This may have even been one of the instances that led the Germans to think, you know what, these 88mm anti-aircraft guns are actually pretty good in the anti-tank role. But anyway, the legend of the KV-2 was born, and in World of Tanks, this thing has always been an absolute beast. Although it certainly used to be more of one. And that's all down to a series of high explosive nerfs that Wargaming have implemented into the game over the years. The tank can fire armour-piercing ammunition, but nobody ever used it because the high explosive was just so good. And if I'm being completely honest, high explosive ammunition... ooh. Oh, that's more like it. 1,000 damage on the VK. You can't angle your side armour against high explosive ammunition. It doesn't work like that. And now I suppose would be a perfect time to talk about how high explosive used to work, which is what made this thing such a monster, and how it works now. There we go, 337 damage on the turret roof of the T-29. Back in the day, that would have probably done 750 damage. Because the way high explosive... oh, what's the Panther doing? This is very brave. Oh, actually, he's timed that really well. Yeah, he's managed to get... okay, that was a very, very good move from the Panther. Is anybody going to support him, or are they all just going to sit there and watch him die? I'm not talking about the two KV-2s here. They're clearly not going to go around the corner. They're too slow and too thinly armoured comparatively, because this is a Tier 7 battle. But there are two other Tier 7s on the team, the T-29 and the Black Prince, who are just over there to the right of the screen. Are they just going to sit there and watch the Panther? They are just going to sit there and watch the Panther die. Okay. Oh well. I can't honestly say I'm surprised by this. But anyway, back to the history lesson, or at least the World of Tanks history lesson on how high explosive used to work. And why it really did need a nerf. Because high explosive ammunition used to almost always do full damage, regardless of what you fired in it. Now, and again, perfect timing, the AT-8, a very, very heavily armoured tank destroyer. Perfect side shot, point blank range. Really? How about the other KV-2? Takes its time. Really? Yes, really. You see, what used to happen was that your high explosive shell would have a blast radius. And you'd hit the target, and then the explosion would spread out to cover the blast radius. Now, if your high explosive ammunition had 90mm of penetration, and you hit a target where the armour thickness was 100mm, it wouldn't penetrate at the point of impact, but the explosion still had 90mm of penetration, so that explosion would spread out and it would find things like viewports and commander's hatches where it didn't have 100mm of armour, and the explosion would then do full damage, which was hilarious if you were in the KV-2, because you've got a 152mm howitzer with a massive blast radius, so you were always going to find weak spots in the armour and do full damage. In fact, I've seen KV-2s one-shotting 2 tanks at the same time. I've done it myself. I'm pretty sure there are videos up of it, many, many years old, where you'd hit one tank in the turret and another tank taking cover behind that tank. Its turret would also be caught in the blast radius, and you'd kill both tanks. But it also meant that anybody who was capable of fitting a derp gun, all of the Shermans, the Hetzers, the Stugs, would fit 105mm howitzers for the lols, because you were pretty much always going to do full damage when you hit something, regardless of how much armour it had, which was a nightmare for the heavies, and it really did need to be nerfed. And so Wargaming nerfed it. What they did was that they changed the amount of damage that a high explosive shell did depending on the armour thickness at the point of impact. So if you had 90mm of penetration on your high explosive shell, and you hit something that had 80mm of armour, you'll penetrate and do full damage. But if you hit somewhere where there's 100mm of armour, you won't penetrate, but you'll still do some damage, probably a couple of hundred. If you hit something where there's 200mm of armour, you'd do damage, but it wouldn't be a lot. It would be reduced by the thickness of the armour that you had not penetrated. Makes sense? And honestly, I think that was pretty fair, because it meant that KV-2s weren't doing 750 damage to E75s anymore. So the historical purists were happy, because it meant that the Shermans, the Stugs and the Hetzers were actually using the 75mm guns that they had in real life, rather than the 105mm howitzers, which, true, yeah, some of them did have in real life, but not all of them. And they were still doing damage. The guys with the really big derp guns, the SU-152s and the KV-2s, were happy because they were still doing damage to targets that they couldn't even penetrate. And obviously the heavy tanks were happy, and the heavily armoured tank destroyers, because it meant that their armour actually had a functional value. And so nobody was complaining about high explosive shells anymore. I mean, people were still complaining about all of the gold ammo spam at high tiers. Oh, enemy arty, check this out. I think Sky Guy definitely fires first, but the Jackson shell overtakes his in flight. It's not a high-velocity anti-tank gun, it's a short-barreled howitzer. I think the Jackson even says something in chat about it. But, yeah, where were we? Oh yes, that's right. Nobody was complaining about high explosive shells anymore. Everybody was complaining about the gold ammo spam at high tiers, and Wargaming, of course, were paying very, very close attention to community concerns. We know this because they said we're paying close attention to community concerns. We realise that it is becoming apparent that the standard of gameplay in high-tier battles, due to the proliferation of gold ammunition, rendering heavy armour almost entirely meaningless, is leading to very, very static and boring and dull gameplay. So in order to address your concerns, we're going to nerf high explosive again. Yep, really. To be fair, Some of the complaints were about the Japanese super heavy high tier tanks that could just spam high explosive everything and do. Oh look, there's the E25. Oh, you're never going to catch that little cockroach. But where were we? Oh yes, the latest high explosive nerf. The nerf was really kind of aimed at these high tier Japanese super heavies that could just spam high explosive at everything without any real care or skill involved. But as usual, Wargaming's nerf hammer isn't particularly subtle. They nerf one thing and pretty much everything within a mile gets clobbered by the collateral damage. And that's basically what happened to the KV-2, because the latest nerf, without wanting to grind you down with all of the precise details, meant that you now had to be very accurate with your high explosive shells. And the KV-2 is armed with a 152mm howitzer that is less accurate than some artillery. Yeah. So you can see why KV-2 drivers were not particularly happy, and yet the KV-2 still manages to do okay. I mean, 1,000 damage against the side of a VK. Oh, he's spotted. Where is it? Come on, you little bugger. Where are you? Is it the oh no, it's not the E25, it's the Pazavasilla? Oh, I don't even know how you pronounce the name of that thing. And he's got the Jackson. Oh, that's bad news. That Jackson was a good teammate. And now the KV-2 has to climb a hill to find the nearest enemy. This is not going to be good. The thing about the KV series of tanks was they just kept putting more armour on them. They didn't bother upgrading the engine, and it wasn't a very powerful engine in the first place. You can imagine how much weight that turret adds to this tank. Honestly, I don't think the actual KV-2 would have been capable of climbing a hill like this in reality. Fortunately, this is not reality. The dead Jackson's saying capture the base. I can kind of see why, even though I don't think it's a particularly good idea under these circumstances, because there is no way you are going to win by capping with an E25 running around. But the Jackson doesn't expect Skyguy to win by capping. And he's quite rightly said there in chat, you're never going to catch an E25, you need to make him come to you. And I can see the sense behind that. Ooh, 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 ooh. Did I mention accuracy? Because it has often been said, and this of course is the chief reason why the KV-2 doesn't really care that much about the latest high explosive nerf. Because the written down accuracy of the KV-2 is a complete work of fiction. The actual accuracy of the KV-2 is a function of how many dissidents you have sent to the Gulag, which causes the dead hand of Stalin to reach up from the depths of hell and guide your shell to the target. Oh, and there's the E25. We're going to pause things here. This is basically the worst possible situation that Skyguy could be in. He's aiming at a small, fast-moving target. He's not even aiming, he's auto-aiming, he's locked on. His tank is moving, the target is moving, it's a small target, his turret is moving, and he is not fully aimed. But he has sent the requisite number of dissidents to the Gulag. So the cold dead hand of Stalin is going to reach up from hell and guide his shot to the target. And thanks to the latest high explosive nerf, he smacks a target right in the side with a 152mm high explosive shell, and it does no damage. Now he's buggered, because there is no way he is ever going to get another shot off at that E25. But the E25, presumably thinking, after taking a 152mm shell in his side armour, 20mm thick and surviving, that he must now be immortal, decides to ram a 50-ton tank with a 25-ton tank. And then the cold dead hand of Stalin reaches up from the depths of hell just in time to ensure that the final snapshot nails the final enemy tank as well. Relatively slow and uneventful start for Skyguy 126 here in this Tier 7 battle on the El Haluf map. Well, aside from the bitch slapping of legendary proportions that he gave to the VK3001P with that penetrating side armour hit. But yeah, the KV-2, always been a legendary tank. Wargaming keep trying to nerf it, but the KV-2 just doesn't care. Skyguy 126 in the KV-2. 7 kills in a Tier 7 battle. The prosecution rests. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.